Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. I'm Marina Arnaldos, and I'm the president of the Young Water Professional Association in Spain. Before I begin with my talk, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. In 2004, I started a degree in industrial engineering, and 4 years later, in 2008, I had the opportunity to go to the US to get a Master of Science degree in environmental engineering. During that year, I was witness to the financial crisis that hit Spain hard, as well as the rest of Europe and the world. When I was done, my parents insisted that I stayed in the US because they thought that job prospects wouldn't be very good in Spain in the coming years. I have to say that at that moment, I didn't realize how serious the problem was, and I didn't take them very seriously. But still, I decided to stay because I had been offered the opportunity to do a PhD in water treatment technologies, and I felt like I wanted to test myself a little bit further. Reverse spoiler alert, my parents weren't precisely wrong. But in any case, I stayed in the US, I went through the PhD program, and I have to be honest with you. They were some of the most challenging years in my life. They tested me in many ways. But they also taught me a lot about myself. And one of the most important things that they revealed was that I had found a true calling in the water sector. It's what I wanted to do. I have to say that at that moment, in 2008, I somehow thought that my case was unique, that I had gone through some struggle to then find my true calling in life. But that belief was challenged some years later, already in 2016, when I was working in Spain for the water sector. And I stepped up to be the president of an incipient young water professional association. Very soon, I found myself surrounded by people that had found the water sector to be their true calling and that were fully invested in it no matter the circumstances and difficulties. So then I saw, my case is not unique. I'm just an example of my generation. Being in the Young Water Professional Association has changed me and has changed the way in which I perceive the water sector. Specifically, it has made me realize that there are 3 traits that the young water professionals are bringing to the table that are different and that are dearly needed to solve the current and future challenges that the water sector has. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk you through them. First challenge. You know, many times when we're heatedly discussing about a challenge in the water sector, we're actually referring to a challenge in water governance, even if we don't fully realize it. Very simply put, water governance is how regulation articulates how the public institutions, the private companies, and other relevant entities come together to provide water-related services. The framework of water governance is not easy in many countries, and Spain is not an exception. In fact, I can tell you that there exist 2,500 ways of managing water services in Spain. Those are many different ways. What happens is that in this situation, it's very hard to compare how different services are performing compared to each other, or how we are performing compared to other countries. It also doesn't let us fully realize the potential benefits from a more integrated water management strategy. And finally, it doesn't allow us to decide in an objective manner what is the optimal degree of collaboration between the private and public sectors in a certain location. Fixing water governance takes negotiation and takes aligning the many times conflicting interests of water users, public institutions, and private companies, and so on. Saying that this is hard is a complete understatement. And this is where I think that young water professionals come in with an attitude of professional empathy. I think that one of the things that facilitates this flexibility is the fact that we change jobs and functions very often. In fact, I can tell you that there are many people in the association that in the last 2 years have changed from academia to the public sector to different functions in the private sector that is very heterogeneous in itself. But beyond being used to looking at the same problem through different perspectives, I think that young water professionals are people that can regard negotiation in complex contexts as something that can be interesting and fun. In fact, in our first national conference, we had an activity that it was a role-playing game of negotiation, and in an invented watershed with conflicting uses and so on. And I can tell you that it was one of the most successful activities. In the end, water governance is all about reaching sound agreements while taking into account the conflicting interests that come together in the water sector. I think that young water professionals are very well prepared to do this. First, because of their context, and second, because it's their natural choice to do so. And on to the second challenge. Because we were discussing, right, that water governance can be very complex, and this doesn't make it easy for us to communicate in a very clear way the importance of the water sector. But the consequences of us not communicating the importance of the water sector or the water sector clearly is that, for instance, consumers can be convinced that bottled water is better for them than tap water. It's part of our job to let people know that when you're consuming bottled water, you're causing a significant damage to the environment, and you're still not doing anything that is better for you or your family. And this should be very clear, and still it's not. In fact, in Spain, we sit slightly higher than the European average when it comes to mineral water consumption, with 121 liters per person per day. Now, if you translate that into water bottles and you take into account the whole of the Spanish population, that means that every year we're building a 40-story building apartment with the bottles that we're throwing out to the environment. And now you think of the city that we are building year after year. It's no secret that our generation is one that likes to communicate, that likes to engage with different communities through the social networks. We've been brought up in the era of internet, and this has to have some consequence. And thus, in the Young Water Professional Association, we've really focused on communication. And I could give you many examples of different initiatives, but I'm going to focus on one. And it's an initiative born from one of our members, Luis Martín, and that has been fully supported by our network, El Club de la Jarra, or the Jar Club. Luis has the idea of forming a community of people inside of the water sector or outside of the water sector that support the protection of the environment by the consumption of tap water. The club provides materials to the people to be educated on tap water, and there's plenty of opportunities to interact with the community. For instance, by reporting the location of public fountains. Making users understand the importance of the water sector will take willingness to communicate. Not only within the water sector, we already do that, outside of the water sector, and in ways that we are not used to communicating and we are not used to interacting. I think that young water professionals are very well prepared to do this. And on to our third and last challenge. I believe that ultimately the objective of the water sector is to achieve water security. And water security is safeguarding sustainable access of adequate quantities, of adequate quality, of water for many things. Sustaining livelihoods, human well-being, socioeconomic development, protecting against waterborne pollution and water-related disasters, and protecting the environment. And all of this in a climate of peace and political stability. Those are already many things that we need to do. So I think that we can all agree that water security is already a huge challenge for the water sector. But it's a challenge that multiplies itself in the face of climate change. Because climate change is bringing an inherent uncertainty to the equation. Because there's this uncertainty and we don't know, we tend to plan for the present. And mind you, there are many urgent, important problems in the present that we need to take care of. The problem with this approach is that climate change is not an option. It's not a negotiation. It's going to happen if we don't address uncertainty in an adequate way. The consequences will be disastrous for the water sector, but for humanity. And this sounds very dramatic, but it's the reality. It is how it is. What you need in this context are people that dare to embrace risk, that want to go out of their comfort zones, out of the road less more often traveled of the famous poem. And by this time in my talk, you already know who I mean. The young water professionals. The kind of people that, pursuing their academic vocation, go to work in different countries and different research groups, not knowing where their next postdoc contract is going to come from. The kind of people that conceive their first startup or fund their first company very early in their professional career, with the difficulties that this entails. And that want to go to foreign countries to work on water cooperation, even if they still have a safe job in Spain. Achieving something great requires you to take a step forward, to take a risk. And in fact, it takes you to look at things in a different way, to do things in a different way. It takes a willingness to innovate. Yeah, in tools and water technology, yes, but in a holistic way, in every single way. I think young water professionals are ready for this. And you know what? I was talking about willingness to collaborate, willingness to communicate, and willingness to innovate. So what I'm actually saying is that being a young water professional is not about your age. It's about your attitude. So what do you say? Do you want to join us in solving some water challenges? We hope that the answer is yes. Thank you very much for your attention.